Welcome to Willie Nelson Mandela's Sewing Hour. For this very first sewing project, we're going to do an embellished onesie for a bunch of kids I know who are turning 1 this fall. First things first, you'll want to have a cutting mat. That's this. The blue cutting mat is made of plastic, and when you use a rotary cutter like this, it should not cut through the mat, but should cut your fabric on even lines. You'll see the grid here. What helps cutting is this plastic ruler. Often the cutting mat and the plastic ruler come together in a package. It's a good deal to buy them together. Additionally, you'll want to have a regular straight ruler. You may also find handy to have several different sizes of scissors on hand, as well as one of these sewing markers. The ink comes off with water, which is helpful when you're ironing and marking up fabric. You'll also want a box of straight pins, and if you're interested, I like to finish my work by including a embroidered personalized tag with my website. This is my fancy schmancy sewing machine that my mom bought me. It's way more complicated than I know how to use, so I'll only cover the basics today. So let's start with the basics. This is your sewing machine needle. Seems pretty basic, right? Not too difficult. Sewing machine needles come in a variety of different sizes for different types of fabric. You want to read your sewing machine manual to make sure that you're using the appropriate size needle for the fabric you're working with. Typically, about 99% of the time, I only work with 100% cotton. So I keep the sewing machine needle in my machine that is just for cotton. You can tell when you've sewn with a little bit of experience when a needle is dull or about to break. It will leave larger holes in your fabric, and the tension will seem funny. That means it's time to change the needle. Needles are inexpensive. It's always better to use a sharp needle when possible. Just above the needle, you'll see the thread. Here's the thread, right? In my machine, it comes up the system and around the back. And here you'll see the machine. Beneath your needle, regardless of your machine, you should be able to find your bobbin. This is the bobbin case. So when you sew, there are 2 threads. There's a thread that comes from the bottom, and there's a thread that comes from the top. The thread that comes from the bobbin is the bottom thread. The thread that comes from the top comes off the spool that I just showed you back here. Depending on your machine, it'll also show you what size stitch you're having, and my machine shows me exactly what the stitch is going to look like right here. I also have the opportunity to choose all these different stitches for what I would like. Winding your bobbin thread can be kind of tricky. I highly recommend pulling out the manual that came with your sewing machine and reading it step by step and practicing with several bobbins. Your machine should have also come with several empty bobbins that you can fill with different colored threads. For example, so the project we're working on today for Sewing 101 with Willie Nelson Mandela, the super dog, oh isn't he so cute, is an embellished onesie. Onesies are those cute little, one-piece outfits that babies wear, right? They're so cheap. They're, $2 to $5 depending on the brand you buy. They're typically 100% cotton, which, like I said, is the ideal fabric that I like to work with. Most of them have snaps down here at the bottom, and they're a blank canvas. So like I said, I have a bunch of friends who had children this time last year. I have 4 babies, 2 boys and 2 girls, who I want to make a onesie for today. And what I've decided is I'm going to embellish a number 1 right here on the front. For my supplies for this project, I've decided I'm going to use this cowboy fabric for the boys, giddy up, and this pink giraffe fabric for the girls. I also need some interfacing. Interfacing is a type of fabric that has one side that's gluey, so when you iron it onto the back of your fabric, it makes your fabric more thick, and it makes your work look more professional. Now I'm going to introduce you to one of the most important tools in sewing, your iron and your water bottle. Your iron can iron down creases, it can make your fabric look better. You'd be surprised after a little bit of experience in sewing how much an iron can help your work look more professional. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by turning this over to the wrong side and drawing my number 1 on the back with that fabric marker that comes off with water. So I'm going to. Now that we have our ones cut out, it's time to interface the back of them. If these ones look a little sloppy to you, it's a good reminder of the name of this little tutorial, which is Far From Perfect Sewing. My sewing very rarely looks like it came out of a boutique, but it is always made with love. Now that I have my 1 cut out, I'm going to use this interfacing. I like fusible interfacing, which means that it goes on with your iron rather than having to sew it on. When you feel interfacing, it kind of feels like tissue paper. One side should be totally flat, and on the other side you should feel little bubbles. Those bubbles are the sticky that will stick to the back of the fabric. So what you want to do is you want to cover whatever you want to embellish on your onesie, place it over. Obviously this is not perfect. Then I'm going to spray it with my squirt bottle. And then I'm going to gently and very carefully iron it. If you've never done this before, I highly recommend putting a tea towel down between your fabric and your iron. I've done this many times, so I know the heat to use with my iron and this sort of interfacing. It's also important to note that interfacing comes in a variety of weights. The heavier the weight of the interfacing, the heavier your end product will be, and so forth. This is called featherweight interfacing because it's just a onesie, right? We don't need it to be super heavy. And just like that, the interfacing is now stuck to my fabric. And I'm going to go over this now with a pair of scissors and cut the one out again. Now that we have our ones cut out and interfaced, we're going to go ahead and move on to our very first onesie. So we're going to pick one of the ones. I'll start with one of the pink ones because they're a little bit bigger and it'll probably be easier. Place it right on your onesie wherever you would like it. You'll notice the interfaced back here. This does make the fabric considerably more sturdy. We're going to take some pins and we're going to pin the onesie to pin the one only to the first layer of the onesie, which means you're going to have to undo the buttons down at the bottom and wiggle your hand up to pin it flat. Now that we have the one pinned on the onesie, don't worry if it's a little bit crooked. After all, it's a onesie and it's homemade. The chances of this thing being covered in spaghetti sauce at some point are pretty likely. But this is a good opportunity to step back and look at your project. You've still got a pretty big blank canvas here. Do you want to add maybe some buttons across the bottom? Probably not for a 1-year-old. Buttons are a choking hazard. But what about some ribbon? Or maybe, I don't know, your signature. Go crazy. It's totally up to you. For this one, I'm going to keep it basic. But I am going to add my signature tag right here across the top or along the arm. Now that I'm at my machine, I'm going to pick out a thread that I think complements the colors of the fabric I want to use. I'm going to go pretty basic with this one, using a light pink to complement the dark pink of the fabric. For this, I'm going to load my thread up on the spool up top here, but I'm going to leave the white thread that I have in my bobbin in the bobbin for now. I'm not going to load it because now that I've undone the snaps on my onesie, I need to be able to bring this up and over so I can sew between the layers. So I'm going to pick a starting point for my sewing. Typically I try to start in the middle, and I'm going to lower the foot. My foot lever is in the back. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to pick which stitch I want. Do I want a straight stitch? Do I want a zigzag stitch? For this I definitely want a zigzag stitch because I have not finished the edges of this fabric. And if you don't use a zigzag stitch that looks more like a serger, then the edges will fray the first time the mom washes the onesie. Now, using my foot pedal very gently, coming back up to the project, I'm going to very, very, very carefully go over this edge all the way around. After I take my first 4 or 5 stitches, I'm going to stop. I'm going to press my back stitch here, and I'm going to lock those stitches into place by having the machine go back over them. Now I'm going to continue this project all the way along the raw edge very carefully, making sure to turn at the corners to follow this all the way along with that zigzag stitch. Once you've gone around all the edges with your machine, easy peasy, you just pull it off, and you want to snip these 2 threads with your scissors, and then go back around and snip any other threads that may be loose on the garment. And there you have it, embellished baby onesies. So easy. The final step and the final touch is to find some sort of card that kind of matches the theme of your onesie. Like, oh, I don't know, those for my cowboy giddy-up onesies for my little boys turning 1, and these African animal ones for my giraffe girls that are turning 1, to say hello to their moms and dads too. And that's embellished onesies. Thanks so much for following along. Please leave your comments at africankelly.com. Bye!